Okay. Hello, everyone. As was mentioned, my name is Ashley McGuigan. I did my PhD here at the botany department. I'm going to be talking to you all a little bit today about my new role as assistant extension specialist in climate and agroforestry and NREM, and how those deliverables feed into my other position as coordinator for the Hawaii U.S. affiliated Pacific Islands. But I also wanted to take this time to just briefly introduce myself. I can probably actually skip over some of the slides because that introduction was a little bit more succinct than mine, so thank you. Yeah, and tell you a little bit more about who I am before delving into the position of the program. Oops, daisies. Okay. Yeah, so my connections to food and agriculture and this place, I was really fortunate to be raised by my grandparents who taught me. My granddad had a garden growing up. I was born and raised in Minnesota. And so my granddad kept a garden for us in the summers. And that is what would feed our family of 6 at that time. Like I said, throughout the summers. And so he was really the one I attribute to helping me to develop an interest and passion for growing food and growing food in ways that return nutrients and health back to the land. He taught me all about crop rotation, weeding, spacing, and making sure that whatever you're doing, returns life back to the soil so that you can grow food again the next year. And then my grandma would take me for walks around the park in the summers, and we would take these big ice cream buckets and fill it with blackberries during the summer season. And so between these two, they really taught me a lot about growing food, foraging for food, and taking care of the place that sustains you. So now whenever I think about, or whenever I see blackberries, I'm reminded of that connection of my grandparents and of those places. And whenever I'm growing food, I'm thankful for those lessons learned from my granddad. So fast forwarding quite a bit, I did my bachelor's at the university, or North Carolina State University, where I lived in the international student dorms. And during that time, I met this guy, Michael Savendra. He is from Fiji, and he was just the kindest person that I've ever met. And he was the one who really encouraged me to go to Fiji and go to the University of the South Pacific as an undergrad and study there for a year. He's currently the youngest serving permanent secretary for climate and environment in Fiji. So just a really accomplished individual, a really supportive individual. This is us last year when I was returning research results back to Fiji with his daughter. So this is the wolf pack symbol. Yeah. Yeah, so the University of the South Pacific, it's a 12-member country institution. That means that students from 12-member countries, including Tonga, Samoa, Vanuatu, send a lot of their students to the Fiji campus to complete their studies. And so I had the privilege of interacting with these folks throughout my time there. I was elected president of the International Student Association. So we were able to have these really unique discussions about the issues that people face in all of these different islands. And a lot of it would revolve around climate, the impacts of climate on their places. As a part of these, as a part of the coursework at the university, we would go to villages in Fiji, and like for geography courses, for example, we would work in the village, and on the left side, we were doing like a biodiversity survey across all the farmed land in this village near Suva. On the right, we had gone up to the tallest mountain in Fiji and done botanical surveys. And as a part of this coursework, we would ask surveys about, or we'd ask the village elders questions about their natural resource use and where they got the materials that they used for building their houses. And I don't remember the question exactly, but I remember we were talking with an elder and he could name not only the species that built held up his house, but where all those things came from on his land. And I just remember thinking, I can't answer that question for myself. I couldn't answer any of the houses that I'd ever lived in. And so that kind of sparked a perspective shift in me and sparked a bunch of different questions that would eventually lead to what would become my PhD project, looking at agroforestry in Fiji, of course, also informed by my upbringing with my grandparents. And how I would come to the University of Hawaii at Manoa. So I got my PhD here in Tamara Tickman's lab. Under the ethnobotany track, also participated in the ECB specialization program. And so this is just a very brief background to who I am, my connection to the Pacific, to Hawaii, to Fiji, and the things that are important to me. So now I'll talk a little bit about my PhD project, which was looking at the social ecological resilience of agroforests in Fiji. But before I get into that, I always like to take a moment just to thank the people that we worked with across all these different places. We worked in 10 different villages. And without these folks' time and patience and Maloma, none of this would be possible. I wouldn't be talking with you today. I wouldn't have a PhD. So don't have time to go through all of it, but I do like to take a moment to thank these people in these places. And then finally, also thanking and recognizing the work that my work builds off of. So this was my work builds off of a 2014 Coastal Seas project that Rachel Dax was also a part of. And so recognizing that actually there's probably a lot of folks in this picture that you can recognize. So this is the team that I worked with for my project. So whenever I say we, I'm referring to the collective we. Mesu Tora, he helped me with agroforestry surveys, which I'll talk about. And he will actually be starting his PhDs here soon, building on this project as well. Unavuli helped me with conducting dietary recall surveys and nutritional side of things. Rosi Baktapasanga also was critical in the dietary recordings that I'll talk a little bit about. And then Vini Tikomavuli helped me in the agroforestry surveys towards the tail end of the project. And so my position is really around extension, right? And my PhD started out through extension. So my Vulavakaviti was in a children's book that was developed by Rachel Dax and other folks from that 2014 project in response to village elders' needs around a way to transmit or talk about signs of generate a dialogue between younger and older generations about climate change and weather pattern changes and what to identify in your place. And so we started out by delivering this to, I think, 4 different village district schools, 1,200 students. And so I mentioned that because as I'll talk a little bit more about later, my position is in extension. And then also all of these all of these extension products and needs assessments are done through a Kalanoa framework or process, which is kind of what I've just done here today. I talked about who I am, my purpose or my intentions here to try and establish a relationship between you all and myself. So I'm just placing my research. So I look at the global influence of food systems and food systems change in the Pacific. So currently food systems, the current food systems that we have in place are causing a decrease in biodiversity and a simultaneous increase in non-communicable disease epidemic and mortality rates. A lot of this is caused by a decrease in the biodiversity that we are cultivating, as well as a decrease in the nutritional quality of those foods. But we know that locally adapted food production systems have in the past provided quality nutrition and a stable source of nutrition for communities in the past. And there is research by that passed on Natalie Kurashima to show that these places can be are able to do so into the future. And some of this work is already being done through organizations such as out at Kaka'iwi, but also just with backyard growers, such in Waikiki. And there's many different ways that these locally adapted food production systems manifest. So this can be things such as home gardens, repairing buffer system, food forests, this is more agroforestry in the Pacific sense, La'ikalo, and silviculture. And so for my work and across a lot of the Pacific, this manifests itself as multi-story or multi-purpose agroforestry. This is a picture from an agroforest in Vanuatu that we've worked in. And so we know that globally, but also in the Pacific, nutrition is changing, and it's doing so at the individual, the food group, and the food system level. So this essentially means at the individual level, we might be growing physically greater mass of produce, but the micronutrient density and content isn't upscaling at the same rate. At the food group level, maybe we're still eating the correct mass or amount of fruits, but maybe we're only getting those from 3 different fruit species as opposed to 5. And then at the food system scale, just a general decrease at all of these levels. So the economics are changing. So I'll be the first to admit these are pictures of meals that I've consumed. And so we know that it's more than just knowing what is quote unquote good and bad to eat. It's a complex equation impacted by access to healthcare and knowledge about foods, changes in financial resources, and just the amount of time that we have to spend per day sitting in front of a computer so that we can afford to put food on the table. And then finally, climate is changing. So this is the context in which my research took place. 2016 Cyclone Winston, which is the strongest cyclone in recorded history of the South Pacific, went through Fiji and caused massive damages to infrastructure like schools, people's homes, forestry resources, and agroforests. So this is Mesu standing bottom left corner where that tree used to sit. So this was a major cyclone. Just for reference, this is Fiji and Hawaii. Big island of Fiji is about the same size as the big island of Hawaii. And the red dots represent the communities, the districts that we worked in. And even though cyclones or hurricanes are maybe not the biggest threat here in Hawaii compared to fires, this is just from this summer. It's a threat. It didn't land, but they may become a bigger issue with climate change. And the principles of resilience remain the same. So the overarching question that I looked at was, in what ways are agroforests resilient to major climate change-induced disturbance? And what is their capacity to support social ecological resilience for human and environmental health? So these places are really important for the conservation of biodiversity. I think it's about 100 of 149 tree species recorded in these places are native. Outside of that, they're also really important places where you'll find food. The four primary root crops then being dalo or kalo, tapioca or cassava, ubi or uhi, kumala or ala. And then all of these crops being composed of an even greater subset of cultivars. Also overstory crops such as plantains or bananas, Barringtonia edulis, which is Hutukana and Fiji, and then pandanus, used for weaving.
Sorry.
Yeah.
What is Musa?
Sorry?
The Musa, what is the AAB?
It's a great question. It's a genotype designation. So there's like the little ladyfinger bananas will be a different designation from this one. So this is just the big. And then pumpkin, chili peppers, and verde. This is just an example. There's many, many more, of course. So these are the sites in which this research took place. Like I said, it was 10 villages, surveyed between 43 and 50 agroforests, and this red line is the path. So the first question was, how does specialty crop and cultivar richness change after a major cyclone? And what does this mean for resilience? So we operationalized the theory of food system resilience, and it's really deserves more time, but I'm going to go over it kind of cursory, given our time. But this is broken down into robustness, which is basically the capacity to withstand. So how much do you change or not after a major disturbance? Redundancy, so this is the capacity to absorb. So perhaps if your kalo supply was wiped out, do you have enough of cassava and sweet potato to fill that food functional need, that role of starch in the diet? How quickly does that food system regain its lost food security? So if you're producing X kilograms per unit space, can you get back to that exact same production level quickly? And then resourcefulness, the ability to adapt, the ability to switch out one crop for another in an emergency situation. So we're just going to talk about resourcefulness, and we're going to talk about three different scales that we looked at. So we looked at this from a starch crops level in total. So this is looking at things like breadfruit, those 4 crops that I mentioned before, as well as a couple other emergency food crops. Then we looked at this just at the level of those four primary root crops, and then we looked at this at the cultivar level. We're only gonna, look at resourcefulness for this part, but resourcefulness is essentially asking the question, did crop or cultivar richness recover to or exceed those pre-cyclone levels? So 2014, before Cyclone Winston, you had X number in richness. 2019, 3 years post-cyclone, were you able to get back to that? So in this first example, you can see there's 4 different kinds of sweet potato. And then by 3 years after the cyclone, you can see that there's again 4 different types. So we would say that that's a resourceful system. It's recovered to its previous levels. In the second example, you can see that there's again 4 different kinds of sweet potato. There are 4 different kinds of sweet potato afterwards. They've changed composition, but that's still a resourceful system in that case. And then in this last example, you can see that while the abundance remains the same, the number of different kinds of sweet potato in the end are actually only 3. You've got a yellow, an orange, and a purple one. So that's not necessarily resourceful, according to this component of food system resilience. So when we looked at this at that all starch crop level, so again, looking at the sweet potato, the breadfruit, any starch crop, we could see that there was only 2 places where this didn't occur. So looking at the 2014 bar compared to the 2019 bar. And so what all this really just means, this is the one that we were just looking at, is that across all of these different 4 components of food system resilience and across all these different levels that we assessed, agroforests in Fiji were extremely resilient to this major cyclone disturbance, with one exception of resourcefulness at the cultivar level. So when we looked at what was enabling that resourcefulness, it was 2 different emergency crops, Dalamikana and Kaile. And what's important about these 2 is that one is more so cultivated by farmers, whereas this one is known to be an emergency famine food, but less so cultivated. And its increase in presence 3 years post-cyclone was not likely due to cultivation, such as what was seen with Dalamikana, but actually just for the simple fact that these are wind dispersed. So we have human management and just natural regeneration helping to confer resilience to the system. Then, I'm going to skip over this the extension component then of my work. Farmers communicated that they wanted access to some of these cultivars and crops they didn't have access to in their local place. We communicated this back to the ministry. Unfortunately, the ministry doesn't have the resources to help supply traditional cultivars, but they do have other types, vegetable seeds, for example, that farmers could gain access to. But we communicated these needs back to the ministry for development. I'm going to skip over this for the sake of time. But the second part of it was just looking at how does the different structural diversity of agroforests help enable resilience, and basically one of the outcomes, which was actually just accepted the other day, was just looking at the impact of wood density on survival across all these different agroforests in Fiji, and found that similar to other forestry studies, the higher the wood density, the greater the chance of survival. And it turns out that 4 of the 6 species with the highest wood density were also native trees to Fiji. So this just highlights the importance of native trees in agroforests. We communicated this back to the ministries of forestry and agriculture, who were in the process of developing their own agroforestry programs, and they indicated that they would include these species as a part of their programs. And then finally, so how do agroforests provide important ecological services and dietary nutrition within the same space for human and environmental health? So we know that tree cover is correlated with agroforestry, and we know that dietary diversity is correlated with consumed dietary nutrition. We don't necessarily have a good understanding of the mechanisms and the connections between those two things. And so what our research did is we took a functional trait approach to look at the traits of agroforests and the functional traits of the food, that the nutritional functional trait diversity of the food in those agroforests, to see if you have a ecologically diverse agroforest, are you going to have a nutritionally diverse agroforest? So what is a trait? Just very briefly, a trait is a morphological, biochemical, etc. trait of a plant that contributes to its ecological function. So flower color would be important for the type of pollinator that plant is going to be pollinated by. Another important trait is clonality. Can that plant reproduce via seed and clonal reproduction? And then what's its tolerance to pests and diseases? Analogously, this would, if you think about a nutrition label for a food, looking at, carbohydrate, protein, fat, and then all those micronutrients as vitamins and minerals per 100 grams, those are the nutritional traits in these foods. And I'll go over that in the next couple of slides, but I just want to talk a little bit about plant traits. So plants are composed of a suite of different traits, and they all can have the same trait present in different quantities, I suppose is how you can say it. So for this example, we have cassava and corn. As you can see, they all have a red circle, a green square, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And some of these traits are what are called response traits, and some of these traits are what are called effect traits. So response traits are things that are important in recovery. These are important in resilience, whereas effect traits are important in kind of business as usual, sort of normal everyday ecosystem functioning. And so that's what I said. And so as you can see, both of these plants, the corn and the cassava, have traits that are important as response traits. They also both have traits that are important in effect traits, these triangle traits. And so it's important to remember that there's no one plant that's important for resilience. It's the collective composition of these plants and their traits in an ecosystem that allows resilience. So in this way, the idea is that you can have a super diverse forest, but if that forest is composed of plants that are all performing the same function and that they all have the same traits, they're going to be less resilient than something that maybe has less biodiversity but greater functional diversity. So if you have an impact such as increased heat, you're gonna have lower resilience in the lower functionally diverse place. And then you'll have better adaptive capacity in the place with greater functional diversity. So as I mentioned, on the left, these are the ecological functions and the associated traits, similar to the nutritional functions and associated traits. So protein and carbohydrate and fats are important in energy metabolism for us, kind of in a similar manner, or not in a similar manner, excuse me, in the same way that plant height and growth form would be important for light interception as the ecological function. And so these things are linked. I won't go over this in too much depth, but for one example over here on the right or the left, excuse me, when corn is planted with a legume, it not only increases the yield of both crops, but it actually increases the protein content in corn as well. So these things are really important to be planted together. So when we looked at if the ecological functional diversity is correlated to the nutritional functional diversity, we found a strong correlation. There are multiple different aspects of functional diversity, and I won't go into them, but we essentially looked at richness and evenness. So richness is kind of, if you think about, we need, this is hypothetical, we need 15 different nutrients in our diet on a daily basis to be healthy. Does the range is thinking about, are all of those 15 things present? Evenness then looks at, are they present in appreciable amounts to be important and to be relevant to your diet and to be functional and effective in your metabolism. So what we found is that there's a really strong correlation between ecologically functionally diverse agroforests and nutritional functional diversity that comes out of them. This is really important in food system planning. And this is something that I got to kind of work on. After my PhD, I was a scientist for the Environmental Defense Fund, working on their climate resilient food systems team. And we used this to develop the forecast tool, which is the forward-looking crop assessment and selection tool that we developed to be used with farmers in a community setting to understand their agroecosystems, the resilient capacity of those ecosystems, and perhaps what they could shift to improve the nutritional quality of those systems, as well as the ecological resilience of those systems. And I'll go into it a little bit. There's a number of steps before this process, but it's an Excel tool. And what it does is it collects basically through a community survey, what folks identify as the most important climate hazards to their region. Before this, they've also gone through a plant listing activity that lists out all the plants that are in their agroecosystems, and then determines in which direction that hazard is going to impact that specific crop and that specific plant part of that crop. So for example, collo, there's multiple edible parts, right? There's the leaves and then there's the corm. So it goes into that level of detail of looking at, is there going to be a difference on the leaf quality as opposed to the corm quality? So anyways, I won't go into it too much, but that's essentially what this spreadsheet is looking at. And then that then populates or spits out this kind of heat map of food resilience that compares the yield to the perceived nutritional quality post climate event, or in the thinking about it in the context of how that edible plant part is going to be impacted by that climate hazards. And so this is a hypothetical. That was animated. That's a hypothetical situation, but if you looked up here, you could say that, okay, these crops are going to fare better in this perceived climate hazard, future climate hazard, whereas those ones over there are not going to. So if you have a bunch of plants over there, trying to figure out a way to maybe diversify with some of the plants that appear to be more resilient. Okay. And then we also looked at this from a nutritional, cultural, and ecological functional perspective. So looking at all of these plants and edible plant parts, how they contribute to these different aspects of functional resilience in these places. again, I won't go into it in depth, but essentially looking at green indicative of you're doing good in that area, red indicative of perhaps that's a place that needs more help, and how can we bolster that? Yeah, so this is, like I said, this is a tool to help communities understand the impacts of climate in their place from a nutritional and yield perspective. It also includes questions for communities to kind of go back and think about, okay, what do we need to bring to policymakers? What do we need to bring to ministry or government folks to help them understand, or at least give them a list of the things that we think are important for ecological and nutritional resilience in our place, and helping to push that forward in planning. And then the partnership. So I'm using all this background to help build out this new partnership between College of Tropical Ag and Human Resources and the USDA Southwest Climate Hub. Before I go into that, before I go into that, I want to just briefly give an overview of what the climate hubs are. So Agricultural Secretary Tom Vilsack announced in 2014 the creation of the first ever regional hubs in 7 different locations. The mission for these hubs were to build on the capacity within the USDA to deliver science-based knowledge and practical information to producers, so farmers, ranchers, forest landowners, to help support decision-making related to climate change. Then there was an additional 3 hubs created, so now we have 10. And then also a new international hub. And the mission for the hubs is similar to what I just read out, but to develop and deliver science-based, region-specific information and technology in collaboration with USDA agencies and partners to agricultural and natural resource managers that help to enable that climate-informed decision making and provide access and assistance to implement those decisions. So again, this is part of that region-specific work. So as I mentioned, it's a collaboration or a partnership between CTAR and USDA climate hubs. My position kind of embodying that. So as assistant extension specialist in climate and agroforestry here, a lot of my deliverables and outputs and goals feed into my role as coordinator for the Hawaii and US affiliated Pacific Island region. And essentially what the climate hubs are, it's almost, as I'm understanding it and learning it, it's almost a federal agency, the federal form of extension. That's what I'm trying to say. So a lot of that work, a lot of the kind of goals and needs are the same in extension and helping producers. So this collaboration, this partnership, the mission then is to generate or to create an integrated climate adaptation and mitigation program that serves underrepresented producers in the Hawaii and US affiliated Pacific Island region. And so this was the need for this position and this role was developed out of a I have my notes, I believe it was HCC convening of professionals that identify kind of 4 main needs for the region around this. And one of them being the development of a centralized resource directory for producers about climate impacts. Second being helping to facilitate access and opportunity for grants and other financial resources. And so I'm envisioning this as not only grants and funding, also understanding tax incentives to diversified production and loan schemes. Then the third is providing tailored technical assistance in agroforestry and climate management. This is very much an extension, a traditional extension product. And then fostering collaborative networks for knowledge exchange and hoping to bring those resources together. And I apologize for font. It's weird. So as a part of that, and I should also preface this. This is my 5th week, and so So I'm doing the landscape analysis right now, trying to understand who some of these actors are in the region. So anything that I'm presenting to you today, I haven't necessarily reached out to these folks, but I am aware of their presence and I am aware of their really important role in all of this, and I look forward to talking with them further. With that, yeah, one of the ideas is developing a producer-friendly website, hosting information about tools that are available, providing links to them, and helping to develop some more comprehensive user guides with example case studies for translation. So we have these really great tools that are available, but I think that one of the barriers is understanding how to use them and creating, like I said, case studies to help you kind of compare your situation to another and make those connections. I apologize, I don't know what happened to the font. But facilitating access and opportunity to the grants and other financial resources, again, in that producer-friendly website, hosting information about the grants, those tax incentives, and other financial vehicles and loans that are available to people and to producers, translating them via those user guides and case studies to demonstrate how to apply these opportunities to your places. Some of the programs that I am aware of are listed here on the slide, but I'm collecting more. So if there are other programs that people are aware of that they think I should be aware of, feel free to let me know. With tailored technical assistance in agroforestry and climate management. So this is, I just got back from a convening with other extension folk, and one of their biggest needs, one of the things that they identified as super important is just greater communication between the climate hubs and extension folk, coordination and student projects as well. And then, like I said, fostering those collaborative networks for knowledge exchange. These are just some of the ones that I'm aware of. But either developing these, growing these, making folks more aware who might be interested or who might be important stakeholders. Yeah, and then is this just takeaways again from the partnership and position. So this is, like I said, a partnership, a collaborative partnership between the college, Forest Service, ARS, all through the climate hubs. And the goal is in identifying needs first and coordinating and developing from there. So just highlighting that these are all just ideas, these are all a vision, but they're adaptive to the needs of producers and communities. That's ultimately who we serve and the goal of the program. So yeah. Now I'm nervous, but nice. I'm not exactly sure. Oh yes, this is actually the website for the stuff that I presented in the very beginning. We will be developing a website based off of what I just presented a few slides ago, but my contact information is up there as well. Thank you.